Freelancers, small business owners, consultants, and solopreneurs. Some people are just drawn to working for themselves. I'm Owen Roth. In this show, I have conversations with self-employed folks about their career journeys. Welcome to the Bossless Path podcast. And here we go. Today I'm joined by Michael Krasilovsky, a former public education teacher turned real estate investor and agent as well. I'll let him clear up the details of what that entails exactly. Michael, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Owen. It's great to be here. I really appreciate getting the chance to be a part of what you've got going here with this podcast. It's wonderful.
Yeah, well, I'm really happy to have you here and hear your story and share it with everyone. Just as I kind of just introduced you there, like many people, it's putting the finger on what you do exactly is a little bit difficult to encapsulate in a sentence. Can you maybe share with us what you do currently?
Sure. I think you did a great job. My story can be summarized with your introduction. I used to be a public school teacher, and I then became a real estate investor, and now I'm a real estate agent as well. So there's a couple of things involving real estate, but they are very different.
Yeah, and I know we've talked about that prior. Could you help delineate the two?
Absolutely. So the real estate investor side of what my wife and I does is that we are mom and pop real estate investors. Mm-hmm. So we live here in a college town in Oregon, and my wife and I, over the years, have accumulated a small little mini empire of just a handful of rental properties that are rented out mostly to Oregon State University students, but also some normal families when they happen to actually apply. And so we own a few rentals, and we manage them ourselves as well. And that's been a really fun part, I would say, of our financial and growth journey over the past decade or so.
I gotcha. And is that how you got into the real estate agent?
That is.
Okay.
Yeah, that's how I got into becoming a realtor. I basically wanted to help other people accomplish similar goals.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. Do the two have some crossover?
A little bit, yeah. It just gets confusing in conversation because both of those are involving real estate and houses.
Right.
But they are separate ways, separate paths in life, if you want to think of it. Mm-hmm. The goal for the real estate investment side of things is to be able to have investments that are part of the community that ultimately provide some passive income. And I'm making air quotes for the podcast listeners, because nothing's truly passive, but
of course.
But it's very different than trading time for money on a daily basis. And so what that looks like is very periodically, every couple of years for us, being able to acquire a property, fixing it up, but not fixing it up to sell it. We're not real estate flippers. Fixing it up so that it's a great place to live, and then having someone else calling it home and managing our rentals and maintaining them and dealing with tenant turnover seasonally when leases end and that sort of thing. So that's more of a long-term, very slow building a financial foundation by accumulating some rental properties. But it's been a really neat journey, and I think that's perhaps why you invited me to be a part of the Bossless podcast here today.
You got it.
The real estate agent side of things is very different. The real estate agent side of things, as you know, is me running a small team out of a franchise real estate agency and helping people on a day-to-day basis, very much working a lot. It's a grind to help people get ready to buy and sell homes and then help them navigate the market that we're in and buy and sell houses, investment properties, small apartment buildings, bare land, all kinds of stuff like that. So that's a very kind of like busy beaver, because the beaver is our mascot here in Corvallis, Oregon.
Yep.
Very, very much a different way to be spending time and a very different way to, over time, have an income as well. That's very much a day job that I work for myself, I guess. So we'll have a different conversation on not if that's bossless, but what that really looks like, right?
Sure. Yeah. Let's go down that path a little bit at the moment.
Sure.
So you mentioned franchised.
So I run a small real estate team out of a local RE/MAX branch. So RE/MAX is a franchise. It's an international brokerage. Mm-hmm. And this gets confusing to people too. I'll try to make it clear. So the way that I think about it is that I don't work for RE/MAX. RE/MAX works for me. And this isn't an advertisement for RE/MAX. That's not the point I'm making.
Sure.
But as someone who's self-employed as a real estate agent, I'm leveraging what an international franchise brings. And so if you want to think of it this way, there's like 25 or so of us in that building, in that RE/MAX building here in town. Mm-hmm. And we're all running our own independent businesses, our own small businesses. We're all independent contractors. But we all chip in together to have the RE/MAX branding and promotions and marketing and share the copy machine and the front desk person and the other support systems and coursework and professional development.
Okay. I think that makes it pretty easy to understand.
Yeah. So I don't think of myself as being employed at RE/MAX. I feel like they work for me. I pay them and I get services from them. Right.
This might be misinterpreting it, but it's more analogous to like a subscription service to something where you get access to the tools. That's kind of probably the wrong way to look at it, but
I like that. I'm not the owner of that company, but I'm the owner of my small business that operates in their building.
Right. Gotcha. Okay. When I introduced you there, I said that you used to be a public educator. Can you maybe take us through your career path and all the little nooks and crannies along the way?
Sure. So I come from a family of teachers, which I think is where a lot of educators come from. We all seem to have parents that were teachers as well. So I was actually, if I'm authentic and honest with myself, I became a teacher because that's who I emulated, if that's the right word. That's who I looked up to. I loved my science teachers when I was a kid, and they made a big impact for me, and I looked up to them. I idealized them or idolized them, and I wanted to become that when I grew up and be a teacher for other people. So I did. I ended up becoming a middle school science teacher, which is a very challenging career, and I have the utmost of respect for public educators. That career path didn't work out long-term for me. I'm totally a statistic in that regard. I burnt out and had a 7-year teaching career. Absolute average. I mean, totally statistic.
Yeah.
But
it actually sounds like a long time, though, 7 years. It's not just like dipping your toes in for a couple of years and then out. But
so I was a public school teacher, and I love the local school district. I have nothing but respect for it. It just didn't work out for me. And I think a part of that was because my now wife and I, we moved here in 2008. Do you remember the economy in 2008? It wasn't stellar, right?
I was coming out of high school.
So I didn't even know anything about the economy, but Ray and I moved across the country with my teaching job in Corvallis at the local middle school to justify the move. And then things just went pretty south with the economy. And I went from having my first public school teaching job to getting laid off from my first public school teaching job.
Oh, wow.
So that was my first year in public education. And I didn't respond very well to that in the sense that I thought, if I'm being authentic with you and your viewers, I thought I had life figured out, right? I thought that the rules of the game were that you go to school and you get a degree, and then you get a safe, secure, stable job with health benefits and a retirement package, and you work there for 32 years, and then you retire. I was like, I did it. Like, mission accomplished. I got the job. I've got life. Boom.
Yeah.
Where's my participation trophy? Because I'm a millennial. And that economic circumstance in 2008 was a wake-up call. I didn't realize that could happen.
Yeah.
And it ended up being that it really instilled a lot of fear in me. And I hate to admit that. I'd love to be here and pretend to be super strong, but I'm human, and that's that.
Yeah.
And even though I ended up later on getting hired back, it was never the same for me, because I was always afraid that, I thought there was going to be this stability in my life professionally,
right.
And obviously that wasn't going to be the case. And it just brought a lot of what ifs. It was kind of a first world problem, of course, but kind of a traumatic experience to be going through that layoff, having literally just moved here as a young couple, and then trying to apply for other teaching jobs, not even nationwide, but worldwide. I was applying for teaching jobs on Army bases in other countries. I was desperate to try to find something.
Yeah.
And it was very challenging, actually. So it was fortunate I ended up getting hired back. But I went back to teaching, but it was never the same, because my mindset had changed.
Sure.
And in the midst of all that, I want to give credit where it's due. My wife, Ray, she started reading all these books on personal finance and entrepreneurship. And eventually, she convinced me that I needed to read them too. And I did. And some of those were like Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad, Poor Dad. It's kind of a pillar in the financial space.
Oh, yeah.
Books like Alan Corey's $1 Million by 30, the story of him being a college student living in his parents' basement, trying to figure out how to get rental properties going and become financially independent 10 years later. And some of those were really interesting and timely and inspiring because it made us realize that instead of pursuing the standard version of the American dream and having this job where I was working for someone else, even though I went back to it, maybe what we should look at is this investment side of things that we'd never thought about. And so instead of connecting with a realtor when we had our feet back beneath us to try to buy a normal person house to live in, we connected with our realtor and we had a conversation that started with, hey, we've been reading these financial books and we want to buy a duplex and do this house hacking thing and live in half of a duplex and rent out the other half and make our own subsidized housing so that if I get laid off again, it'll at least be a property that pays for itself if I have to go teach science at an army base in Germany. And that was our plan.
Right.
So that's how I ended up going back to teaching, but talking about real estate because I really had a new passion in that regard. And I was jazzed up about real estate, and I still am.
Yeah.
And we accomplished that goal. I think it took a year or two from deciding we wanted to do that to getting our first property, but that was exactly what we did. We made our own subsidized housing. And I kept teaching, but I was definitely talking about real estate. And a couple years later, we managed to get a second property going. And eventually I decided that I was in the wrong career. And instead of being a public school teacher, I wanted to actually make the jump and become a real estate agent, following in the footsteps that time of, instead of my teacher, my real estate agent. I just always follow who I idealize, right?
Yeah.
And that way I could try to help other people accomplish those same goals. So I had I think a 5-year teaching career, including the year I was laid off in public education.
Okay.
It was 7 years total. I had some Florida private school stuff.
Right. Okay.
And then became a realtor, and so then became a self-employed realtor. There's, come to think of it, Owen, there's some other small stuff in between there that I didn't think to mention. Do you want to hear about side hustles? Would that be useful?
Yeah, let's hear about the side hustles.
So I'm just recalling this now, but come to think of it, when I went back to teaching, I also started making websites. And I don't know much about web development. You probably know a lot more than I do.
I know nothing.
Okay,
Yeah.
You might still know more than I do. But
you did it.
One of the computers that I had way back when, it was this like 1-inch thick white plastic MacBook, the old ones with the light up Apple. It had a program on it called iWeb that doesn't exist anymore. And it was a WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get.
Yeah,
web developer.
That's how I built my first website for my first video business back in college. Yeah.
Love it. So I figured out how to use that program and managed to get through a pretty long call with GoDaddy or some web hosting platform and started building websites. And that started because I was building a website about my teaching experience as as part of a job application, if you want to think of it that way.
Oh,
right. It was like MrKScience.com or something.
Yeah.
So I started building websites for other people too, and I only ever got a handful of them going. But I made a website for a local friend's rock shop on 9th Street in Corvallis, and for a creperie food cart, and a couple other kind of small random businesses. I had a lot of fun with it. It never took off. I never managed to make that into a thing, and that's probably a good thing because once those programs that I used went defunct, I never would have known how to maintain the websites anyway.
Yeah. You were only as good as the tools you're using.
But it was good experience to get a side hustle and feel what that was like and have yet another but slightly different relationship with trading time for money and being employed for someone else versus doing something where I was self-employed. But the funny thing is, there's this Robert Kiyosaki book that I read. I think it was called Cash Flow Quadrant, where he talks about how people spend their time versus how they make their money and what the pros and cons are of each. And I read that book early on, and I thought it was very helpful. I kept doing things like this, like building websites for people, and even ultimately becoming a real estate agent, thinking I was becoming a business owner. And then only later on realizing, wait, I'm still self-employed. I'm still trading my time for money.
Right.
And that's part of what I hope will be helpful for your Bossless Path listeners and viewers, is that not all ways to be bossless mean that you're actually the business owner necessarily leveraging other people's time. You might be bossless, you might be your own boss, but you got to keep in mind that some of the versions of that are still very time intensive. That really means that it's all on you. So you got to be okay with that if you're going to take that career path, because if you don't do something, it doesn't get done.
Right.
Right. And you and I have talked about this. We probably worry that a lot of people look at the bossless path and they might mistakenly think, oh, that means that you've got just lots of flexibility with your time and you don't have to work that much and it's easy. Well, when you're your own boss, often that means that you're working 24/7 or 25/8, right? It's kind of the opposite.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be that way, but it can be depending on what you do. So if you're a viewer or listener of this, it's, I hope, helpful to consider that along the journey and maybe deliberately craft what your bossless path might look like, because you got to think about these things before you get started. You know, what are your time constraints? What are your boundaries going to be? Are you okay with working 24/7, or do you want to make sure that you stay married? I mean, like, you might as well be deliberate about these things and how you're going to set up being your own boss if that's the journey. And taking into account some of those things that I know I didn't think about initially, like, hey, wait a minute. When I was a teacher, I had health insurance. It was supplied by someone else. Turns out that was worth a lot of money, right? So are you going to find a way to get health insurance? Do you have a team that you're putting together, a professional team for life? Do you have an insurance agent? Do you have an attorney? I like to say it's important to have a lawyer for when things go wrong, but also when they go right. Right? When your business takes off, when things are going well, you might want to set up entities, set up an LLC. You might want to set up a trust for properties. There's all kinds of stuff to think about. Lawyers aren't for just when things go wrong.
Right.
And have a great accountant on your team. These are just some of the people that I recommend as being like key all-star parts of my professional team for life. You know,
Right.
my accountant gives us amazing financial advice in terms of, you know, hey, these are things that can be write-offs. This is something that you should invest in. This is maybe a business entity or business structure to think about for tax purposes, to layer into the conversation I'm having with the attorney about setting up an LLC versus setting up an S Corp, and what does all that even mean?
Right.
You know, definitely put a team together.
Sure. And for clarity, when you're saying team, you're not talking about a team that is specific to, like, you know, well, with you, your business, or you're talking about someone who's like with you as an individual moving through all the things that you're doing.
That is what I mean. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think that everyone needs a team in life. You don't go it alone, right? It's better. We're better together. And there's experts out there who will pay for themselves. And having a great accountant, having a great attorney, having even just a casual mentor. Come to think of it, I hope they're still in existence since I'm mentioning them now, but I had a mentor through the SCORE group. Are you familiar with them by any chance?
The name rings a bell, but I don't.
It's an acronym. I should have looked it up ahead of time. I just didn't think about it. But SCORE. And I remember getting started with all this and having a mentor. I think his name was Peter, and he was a retired Hewlett-Packard executive who also had experience with rental properties. And it was a free mentor through the SCORE group. And that was their mission. That was their point, was just to help people put together a business plan.
Huh.
And be deliberate about the venture so they could have a successful adventure. And so, you know, putting together a team, I think, is a really important thing when you're doing anything of significance, especially including maybe transitioning from a typical 9-to-5 job to having your own bossless path. So find other people like this podcast, right? Take in content like this. I mean, Owen, you could be doing anything with your time, and you're spending your time putting together a resource like this to benefit other people. This is free for viewers and listeners. Take in content like this. I mean, this needs to be part of the team. It needs to be part of the mindset, part of the operating system that you download into your brain so that you can have a good foundation along your journey.
I mean, that is part of why I'm doing this. But yeah, it's just like there's so many resources out there, and the internet is just, I mean, we grew up as millennials, like in this like ridiculous time period where you can just like jump into all this information, and a lot of it is free. A lot of it isn't, but yeah, it's very easy to at least get the ball rolling with some of the free resources, and then work your way into finding what you need to pay for and what have you. So,
for sure.
So you were a teacher, and then you where you got a little bit burnt at the beginning of it, unfortunately,
Yes.
and then that spurred you to look into all this other stuff. Can we maybe go into where that the steps were in becoming an investor, and then taking it in taking another step, not necessarily like in a linear fashion, but just a different step in that real estate realm.
So we were, and I say we because it was my now wife and I, we were reading financial books. And I think that's a great place to start. Get your hands on books and podcasts and connect with maybe like a local rental housing association in your area and connect with some other people that could be good mentors who have been along the path, hopefully very successfully. Mm-hmm. And we put together a team. I think that was one of the first things we did too, was in this case, we connected with a great local realtor and we did that word of mouth. We asked around at the school, who would be a great real estate professional to help us along this journey. So we didn't, and I say that deliberately, we didn't just look at whoever had a billboard that said, I'm number one, because everyone's number one in that industry, right? It's kind of a cliche. You pass the vocab test, they give you a pin that says you're number one. Great. So the way that the client needs to differentiate real estate agents, I would say, is word of mouth referrals. And ask around, ask people that you know, like, and trust who will serve you with excellence, who's that right team member. And that way you don't have to interview 3 or 5 or 20 real estate agents. Find someone you already know who's been down that path, see who they would recommend. If they don't recommend them, don't use them, right? Simple as that. Mm-hmm. But in our case, putting together that team was putting together a great local real estate professional, a great local lender, local mortgage broker, a mortgage professional, and then starting a conversation and getting a CPA, an accountant on board too, and getting that team together so that we could have our own little mastermind, right? And have sounding boards for, hey, here's what we're thinking about doing. Does this make sense? And we ended up making a plan to get a duplex as our first property, as I think I mentioned, to basically house hack a place, it's called, and make our own subsidized housing. Live in one unit, rent out the other. And the reason for that was going back to Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad, Poor Dad. He talks a lot about really how most people buy a house and don't think of it as a liability. They think of their house as being their biggest asset. But the way that he defines an asset versus liability was a game changer for us. His definition was that if a property or a car, whatever it is you're talking about, if it takes money out of your pocket on a month-to-month basis, that's a liability, right, not an asset. So can a house be an asset? Sure, someday when you sell it, but that means you're not living there anymore.
Right.
So for our journey, that was a pivotal moment, was realizing, okay, wait, our goal, the American dream, the classic conventional one of buying a house, would be yet another thing that would cost money, would not contribute to our financial security or just peace of mind. But buying a rental property like a duplex where we could live in half of it, rent out the other half, and if something happened, like I got laid off again, needed to move, we could rent out both sides and it would pay for itself. Mm-hmm. It wouldn't take money out of our pockets month to month, and maybe would even make some left over. That was how he defined an asset. Right. So that was a game changer for us. Mm-hmm. So we started looking at cash flow positive rental properties, because as I talked about with a friend during lunch today, who I hope will be a future guest on your podcast,
yep, we're talking about that.
Cash always flows. But cash flow positive means something different than cash flow negative.
Yeah.
Right? So it's not necessarily easy to find a cash flow positive place depending on the market you're in, which is why it takes some time and you got to practice. You got to crunch numbers. So we got really good at making spreadsheets about cash flow of rental properties, and then eventually found a place that I remember actually being really intimidated by. We found a place here in Southwest Corvallis, and it's a duplex that had a kind of like a house down below and then a mother-in-law apartment above the garage.
Okay.
Which was a really neat opportunity for us, because my wife and I were looking at this and we're like, yeah, it would be really sweet to live in that house. But financially, what we need to do for our goals is get this place and live in the little 550 square foot, 1-bedroom mother-in-law apartment above the garage, mm-hmm, and rent out the 4-bedroom house below. And that's what we ended up doing. But it was scary. Yeah. I mean, every single time, because I'm now a realtor, so I'm switching hats for a sec.
Yep.
Every time in my career that I've helped someone else buy a house, it's always scary. It's always more money than they want to spend. They are always second guessing it. It's never totally comfortable to be like, oh yeah, this is such a great deal. What a no-brainer. No one seems to say that in this market.
Yeah.
And I remember looking at this place and it was listed for sale, I think for $245, which was an absolute ton of money at that time.
Yeah.
Housing prices have gone up.
Just a little bit.
Just a little bit. And I remember thinking, and I just want to be authentic with you because this was my mindset. It was still very much in progress. I remember thinking, can we afford this? On my teacher's salary, I'm pretty sure I can qualify for a loan of like $199, something like that, $245. That doesn't compute. And my realtor had to very patiently, constantly remind me as we looked at these properties, Michael, when it comes to multifamily, like a duplex, rental properties, and there's tenants that are helping pay off the mortgage, the lender factors that in, and that allows you to qualify for more and buy a place that you wouldn't necessarily qualify for if it was just a normal house. Because the lender factors in the rental income. Right. And that seems pretty basic, but I had to keep getting retrained on that.
Sure. It's also probably well, I can say probably, I also know because this is how you and me know each other from when I have been sort of casually looking at houses for a while. But yeah, it can be intimidating when you're looking at huge numbers.
Absolutely.
Huge numbers. And down payments are also a huge part of that number, even though it's a smaller part of the even gianter number. So
still talking about substantial amounts of money.
Yeah, and it's not like, deciding which toothpaste to buy at the grocery store.
There you go.
Yeah. So it's intimidating stuff.
Yeah, you're talking about thousands of dollars, not something that's just a few bucks or a few hundred.
And it doesn't have a return policy like Amazon does, where you could just be like, oh, no, I changed my mind.
Oh, my gosh. Yeah. I love that you just said that. There's a good tagline in there. Let's flesh it out. Real estate doesn't have a return policy, but it's got a great return on investment policy. Something like that. There's potential there.
Yeah. We can workshop that.
We'll workshop it. So we're looking at this first place, and I'm like, I don't think we can afford it. She's like, remember, you can, because especially if you're living in just half of it and you're renting out 4 bedrooms, this all pencils out just fine. Mm-hmm. And it did. And so I got over that, and we ended up making an offer on this place. I think we got it for $235 at the time. This is maybe 2010, give or take.
Okay.
So I know I'm dating myself with those numbers, but it always feels like it's too much.
Right.
And then in retrospect, 10 years later, you're like, I can't believe I only got it for that amount, right? That's typically how real estate goes. We can never promise return on investment, disclaimers here, all that fun stuff.
Sure.
And we got into that place. We made it into our first house and our first house hack simultaneously. Mm-hmm. And it actually, in some ways, even made a little bit of money, but we would always take that money and put it back into the property. We would upgrade flooring and put in an air conditioner and give it a fresh coat of paint. We would do stuff because I was still working my conventional job as a school teacher when all this happened. I got hired back. And it worked really well. And we had no idea how we were going to get a whole bunch of these rental properties going. So viewer, listener, make a better plan than I did. I mean, we didn't know how we were going to do it, and we didn't put together the kind of mentorship that I wish I would have. I didn't really manage to connect with a lot of other people that had already been there, done that. Yeah. And in retrospect, that would have been really smart. We would have been able to do this better and faster. But we figured, okay, we can make maybe a couple $100 off this duplex at the time per month. So we only need to figure out how to get 20 of these to live off of. It's like, how on earth are we going to get 20 of these?
Right.
But what I also didn't think about, which is why I want to be authentic about what my mindset was like way back when, what I didn't think about was, hey, there is this thing called inflation that seems to be pretty inevitable. You always hear people saying things like, oh, remember when milk used to cost X amount and when a movie used to cost X amount, all these things. Buying rental property real estate in some ways is kind of like buying a cow, because you know that later on, milk's going to cost a lot more than it does right now. So if you buy the right cow and you can make a little bit of profit selling some milk right now, odds are later it's going to work a lot better because you already locked in the price of that cow.
Right.
And that's how rental real estate goes.
Yeah.
When we look now at our mortgages that we're paying 10 years later on these places, they're really low. They didn't feel that way at the time.
Of course.
But they're really low. The rents have gone up. And we feel very strongly about being very ethical investors. We don't gouge our residents. We undercharge them. We know our rents are lower than market value. But it makes us feel good. I hope it makes our residents appreciate us, stay for a longer period of time. And it's almost just a way of doing, I want to say, like socially responsible capitalism. And real estate allows you to do that. You don't have to charge an arm and a leg for rent and be a slumlord to make money. It can be a win for everybody. It can feel really good, and we feel very strongly about that. We want to have investments that are profitable long-term for us, that are great houses to live in, and are great assets to the community, that they're good neighbors to live next to as well.
Right.
And the bar is low. I mean, there are some people who just don't do that. which makes it that much easier to just leap right over that bar as far as I'm concerned. And a lot of people like us are doing that.
Yeah.
So I'm very big on helping our clients on the real estate side of things understand that you can do this and you can have, an ethical capitalist venture here that can be lucrative. You can make money doing it, and it could be doing a good thing for everybody that's involved. You don't have to be taking advantage of people.
Right. And that's a really important note. And that's one of the reasons why, we got connected through a friend of a friend who had used you as an agent years ago. And I was looking at buying, and I've read Rich Dad Poor Dad and the other book you mentioned, The Quadrant. I've also done I've had a similar path, though at least a recording date here, haven't bought anything, but it's something I've been toying with, and it has been interesting to start to understand how the real estate side of things work, and go through a lot of the mental stuff, mental processing of how it all would play out, and that it's just like many things in life. There's stereotypes. And whenever I would talk with friends about this over the past few years about I'm thinking about buying a place and renting it, almost always I have this reaction from the people I talk to who be like, oh, you're just going to be a slumlord. You're just going to be
that's what people think, right?
It's the same. I mean, just well, I don't want to pick on you real estate agents too, but there's stereotypes exist. And they exist for a reason, because there are people who set those stereotypes, but they are stereotypes. They're not blanket statements that apply to everyone. And there is certainly a way, as you're laying out, to do ethical landlording. And we don't live in a communist society where government housing is owned, the housing's owned by the government and distributed that way. So there's a way to participate in it.
And that's the message that I'm really wanting to get out. And I don't want to turn your platform into a shameless plug. That's not my intention as I say this. But I'm working on a book. It doesn't even exist yet, so you can't buy it. But maybe someday on Amazon.
You might be able to by the time this releases, because this will release far later. But yeah.
But I really want to get our story out there so that people can realize the power of real estate investing and help people get over that hurdle of getting that first place, and having people see that this whole house hacking thing, living in part of the rental property, is a very valid and viable version of the American dream. It happens to be that the American Dream 2.0, that title's already taken. Some other guy has a book called that about real estate stuff. Darn. I'm like, darn, he beat me to it. Yeah. So I got to think of something else. But it's a great way to do something that is profitable for yourself and still a good thing for the rest of society that's involved too. There's a system in place. There's rules to the game. And I feel like those rules, once you understand them, are actually really straightforward. It is not rocket science to get started in rental property investing. And there's some beautiful things about rental property investing that other types of investing just don't have as advantages. And so I want to make sure that people understand those rules, understand how to use that system, work within it, and be successful in it. And one of those big key takeaways that I haven't even thought to mention yet, because it's, for me, such an underlying foundational principle, is that in real estate, you can leverage money. So when I talk about we bought our first rental property, it was $235,000. I was a school teacher in Corvallis, Oregon, who was maybe 25 years old, something like that.
Yeah.
I didn't have $235,000 laying around. I had a budget that I never stuck to because we never had enough money for it. We never went into bad credit card debt, but I was making $2,000 or $3,000 a month. And we were living, if you want to think of it that way, paycheck to paycheck. We were fine. We didn't have food insecurity, but I didn't have $235,000 sitting around.
Right.
I had a few grand sitting around. And even that felt like an amazing accomplishment. Real estate allows you to have just the down payment, right? And I think I'm quoting Kiyosaki here, so I don't want to pretend like I invented any of this.
Sure.
But I feel like it was one of his books where he said something to the effect of, if you walk into a bank and you say, hey, I'd like to borrow hundreds of thousands of dollars to play in the stock market, they just laugh at you. But if you walk into a bank, or better yet, a local mortgage broker's office that was referred by someone you know, like, and trust, and you say, hey, local mortgage broker who's an absolute local rock star, you're amazing at what you do, how do I borrow a couple $100,000 or more in this case, because prices have gone up, to get into real estate investing? They're like, oh, well, we pull your credit and here's the form for that, and let's talk about how this works. That's how that system is set up. You can leverage other people's money. And a lot of people have the misconception that in rental property investing that you have to have a huge down payment, and you don't. So it is different. You know, Owen, if you decide tomorrow that your goal in rental property investing is that you want to buy a duplex that you're not living in, you need to have like a 25% down payment. I think it's 20% for a house, 25% for a duplex, triplex, fourplex.
Gotcha.
But if you want to house hack a place and live in it, then it's an owner-occupied loan. Mm-hmm. Our first duplex we moved into, we did a 3.5% down payment owner-occupied loan. Real estate allows you to do that sort of stuff. We leveraged the rest of the money by borrowing it from the bank.
Yeah.
And we made an informed decision. We had a little spreadsheet set up so we knew what the cash flow was going to be to make sure that it worked. And it wasn't just a property that was hemorrhaging money on a monthly basis. But the beauty of that is that we locked in the monthly payment. In real estate, you lock in that payment when you buy the place. Yes, I know. Taxes and insurance go up a little bit over time. But a bulk of your payment is the mortgage part, not the tax and insurance. You're locking in your payments. So that payment that we got in 2010 for $1,300 a month on that rental property, which seemed like a ton of money at the time, is now still $1,300 a month. And the rents have gone up a lot in the past 10 years. Even when we're ethical investors and not just jacking rents up as much as possible, the cash flow has improved very nicely, and that payment is still the same.
Yeah.
And that's part of the power of rental property investing. And that's not even mentioning that we bought a rental property worth $235,000, and the appreciation that's happened on that is based on that price, not our down payment.
Right.
That's part of the power of rental property investing. And for us, our goal was we wanted to figure out how 10 years later, we would get enough rental properties that would support our basic living expenses, our basic budget to replace my teacher's salary if something bad happened. Mm-hmm. It took 11 years. Our 10-year plan took 11 years.
You could, bad, though.
Yeah, I mean, that's not massive failure. This is great. Mm-hmm. But I got to tell you, we made a safety net in that regard, and it allowed me to make some important life changes and professional changes. Mm-hmm. So let's take that back to Bossless Path. Right?
Sure.
So I was a real estate investor, and we're slowly accumulating these rental properties and very slowly getting some better cash flow as time goes by. 10 years later, big difference. 6 months after buying a place, not much of a difference. Took a long time.
Yeah.
You know, there's no get rich quick thing here, at least not the way we did it. And along that journey, it was 2013. I actually made the switch to become a real estate agent. So now I'm self-employed. I'm bossless. I'm my own boss. Mm-hmm. But you know that I work my tail off. Mm-hmm. Most real estate agents do. So there are some pros and cons there. We do have the flexibility. You know, I was able to, with only having a very minor panic attack today, turn my cell phone off to do this interview with you. So I can do that. I've got the flexibility. But holy cow, a lot of bossless people are self-employed and they do work a lot. So take that into account.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of a workaholic, and I shouldn't say kind of, right? If I'm going to be authentic, I'm a workaholic in recovery. And I know that that's a bad thing. I'm not saying that as a humble brag or anything. I'm sharing my own shame if I'm being truthful in that regard. It is only because my wife is the most patient person on the entire planet that this ever worked for us. I mean, I can't imagine anyone else who, after me realtoring all day, and I just made it a verb, it's realtoring now, and, you know, me coming home at like 9, 10, 11 o'clock at night, sometimes midnight. I mean, I'm just like writing offers all night long, doing paperwork, all this stuff. Like, I'll walk into my house at 10 o'clock at night on some days, and she'll be like, oh, wait, I'm not quite ready to talk to you yet. Like, I'm writing a short story or something. Give me 5 more minutes. I mean, thank goodness for her, yeah. You know? And the only way that I was able to, for better or worse, kind of buy myself out of that a little bit was when we finally hit our safety net goal as rental property investors. And that coincided with me turning 40 years old. It was the same year. So my kind of midlife crisis, or really midlife rescue in that regard, was knowing, okay, we've done this, we've worked hard, we've made some really good rental property investments. We've hit that safety net goal where I'm not doing right now that whole, financial independence, retire early thing. I didn't mic drop and just leave my real estate business behind or anything. I'm still working a lot, but I made some changes. I hired a buyer's agent. And that doesn't sound like a monumental shift, but the person that I found is still amazing. She's a really valued team member. I really appreciate her. Her name is Noelle. Hopefully she gets to watch this sometime. Noelle, big shout out to you. You're a lifesaver. Our clients love working with you, and I really appreciate you. But I wouldn't have hired her. I wouldn't have been able mentally to make that shift and bring someone aboard and start having help, quite frankly, if I didn't have the safety net that the rental properties provided.
Sure.
I would have just kept grinding. And I hate to admit that, but that was the reality.
Yeah.
So maybe someday later, the rental properties will allow me to make some even bigger changes in terms of my relationship to what my realtor business is and how I spend my time. But that was the first big milestone. And it is a big one for me, even though it might not sound that way. Because I loved what I do.
Yeah.
But I was burning the candle at both ends because I loved what I did.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds big to me if you're able to have that sense of security, and it allows you to make a change that isn't comfortable, which it sounds like it's not a natural one, at least.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I applaud you.
Appreciate that.
So you reached this milestone goal, and you've felt that ability to relieve some pressure and hire Noelle, and I know you've got more people on your team as well.
I do. We've got a great team. It just happens to be that she was the solution to the most amount of time that I was spending, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah. No, not to sell anyone short, but I'm curious where you see it. You like working. Workaholic and recovery. Is that what the phrase you just used?
I really hate it, but yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, yeah, that is what I said, and it's accurate.
You sound like you wouldn't be happy if you weren't working in some capacity. You want to be doing something, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. What are you trying to shape this into as far as your recovery?
So where is this all going now?
There you go.
Yeah. So at this point, I don't know what the future is going to hold for the real estate investor side of things.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard being a real estate agent and wanting to buy investment properties. I've got one of these going right now. There's this really exciting property that I helped someone buy years ago. They need to sell it now. Oh man, do I want to buy this property. I could rent the heck out of it. It would be such a good rental. I live down the street from it. It would be wonderful. But I gotta give other people a chance first.
Yeah.
So it's hard being a realtor who wants to buy rental properties because I always end up hooking up other people with the best ones. So let's put a positive spin on that.
Mm-hmm.
I get the leftovers and I've still managed to hit some great life goals. People can do this.
Yeah.
So I don't know if we're going to buy a bunch more rentals. I don't know what that's going to look like. On the realtor side of things, having the investment safety net is allowing me to make changes. And I think now what I need to do is really figure out how to scale the things that I've learned and the systems that I've put in place, in part by having, mentoring, and growing the great team that I've got in real estate, meaning as a real estate agent business,
right,
not investor. And now start focus on content creation like this. I really want to get a number of books published so that I can scale what I've done and help impact more people, aside from just the people I meet on a one-on-one basis as clients.
Right. Yeah.
So I want to get a book published on real estate investing, a quick follow-up right after that, a book published on how to self-manage your own rental properties,
mm-hmm.
not because I think everyone should, but so that people can make informed decisions about if they should or not, and if they decide to, so that they can at least have a really good foundation for how to do it well. And then totally separate from those, I'd really like to write a book about how to be the top real estate agent in your marketplace, because I no longer feel imposter syndrome in that regard. At one point a year or two ago, I got a nice little plaque that said I was the highest producing individual agent in Corvallis. I'm not saying that to brag, because it's just the ranking that particular company did. Who knew if it was accurate? And there were teams, bigger fish, that were doing way more, but I was the highest producing solo agent at the time. So we're all number one at something. I got a nice little plaque. I proudly have it as the background of my YouTube thing.
Yeah, well, still congratulations, but yes.
So I've got these 3 content streams in mind. I really want to get those fleshed out, get books going for each of those, get social media, YouTube channels going for each of those. Maybe if you teach me how to use all this podcast equipment, I can turn some of the YouTube videos I'm making into a podcast too. I have no idea how this works. So good on you for taking the time to do it. And make some online courses to really go behind each of those content streams as well. I feel like, and I might be wrong, I might adjust this later, but I feel like part of my Bossless Path now is, okay, let's put together these books, YouTube channels, and online courses. Have the YouTube channels for each of these content streams, each of these ideas, be a free way to get some information out there for people. Have a book be a way to have people be able to invest 15 or 20 bucks, however much a book costs, and get that much more of a cohesive package for the information. And then have really deep diving online courses where people, if they're ready, willing, and able to, can invest more than 15 or 20 bucks and get a really good deep dive into the content. And I'm hoping that I can figure out how to do that in a way that provides value so that I can be making money at the same time while helping impact people and have them get their own life-changing transformational journey as well. Want it to be a win-win. We're always looking for the win-win here.
Yeah, I'm hearing a lot of similarities to what you were talking about earlier with being a landlord.
And I'm under the impression, hopefully not falsely so, I'm under the impression that if you do a really good job making online courses, you can make a decent income or a good income doing that. I'd like to see how that goes. I'll let you know.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things that I've got in mind. And we're having a really good time on the realtor side of things with growing the team now that I've got an actual licensed realtor, Noelle, as part of it. I've always had some outstanding admin support, but that is different than having other realtors as part of the team, because other realtors on the team can help show properties. They can help negotiate, help write offers.
Yeah.
So I'm buying some of my time back there. And I'd really like to expand some of the social media presence we're doing, which is just right now making YouTube videos about living in Corvallis, and really have it be maybe multiple channels about living in all these different areas. And then perhaps use that as a way to grow my team into those areas. Because I feel like there's...
sorry to interrupt. When you say different areas, what do you mean by that?
Oh, sure. So a lot of people right now are finding my business word of mouth, and that's always the point. But since the pandemic, a lot of people were living in these really big cities, high cost of living, and they didn't actually want to be there. And now they got permission to work remotely. So they're looking around at, YouTube is basically a search engine. They're looking around at, small college town in Oregon, better public schools than where I live right now. Traffic is easy, very bikeability, very high bikeability. Trailheads right outside your front door. And they're moving to places like this. So I've got some social media presence, some information on there about like living in Corvallis, but it almost does my business a disservice. It's great because people find us and we help them move here and buy houses. But sometimes they find us, we start talking with them about Corvallis, and they don't realize that we also help people buy and sell homes in the entire area surrounding this. Just happens to be that my office is in Corvallis.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh my gosh, we need to systematize and deliberately do this kind of content about not just Corvallis, but about Philomath, Albany, Salem, Eugene, expand into Portland even, and maybe literally grow the team further into these other marketplaces within the state.
I see.
Or at least have the opportunity to be giving people the kind of information that they want to be able to make those life decisions about making a move, and then just connect them with a realtor friend of mine if I don't actually grow the team into Portland.
Right.
But I want to see what happens. So again, the intent there is to lead with value and then have it be a way to have me step back in my own business, and instead of being boots on the ground for everything, be able to bring aboard some more great, talented, real estate agents in this and related markets going a little bit further out so that we can actually serve people with excellence in those areas too.
Gotcha.
So that way I can, if it all goes well, not necessarily be working 24/7, but still be able to really help and impact people while mentoring other people within my business and helping them grow as people and professionals while impacting other people.
Yeah.
So that's where I hope this all goes.
Well, the first stage is having that goal, right? I mean, that's just like you had the goal with the 10-year plan that became 11 years, but having the goal gives you something to shoot for.
That's true. And I'm not trying to put you on the spot on your own podcast.
No, let's hear it.
Do you have goals as an entrepreneur yourself?
Yeah.
Are you willing to share any of them?
I can share, sure. Yeah. I only quit what I always called my day job. You said JOB, which is you're the second person I've heard refer to it as a JOB.
I don't know why that is.
Yeah, but it's great. Anyways, I've always had one of those, and part of it was fear of just like taking on, because my dad's an engineer. I'm like always been about calculations and stuff like that.
Structure.
Yeah, within reason. But yes, so I've always had that processing things and gathering information before I make decisions and all that. So I knew from, my younger adulthood that being self-employed wasn't just doing whatever you wanted. I did know what it meant, and that's scary when you know that, when you're not ignorant. Because if you're ignorant, you can just jump in and be like, oh yeah, this is going to be great. And then you learn, and then you either stick with it and succeed, or maybe you're like, it's not for me, I'm going to go get a job.
Yeah.
But I just didn't really feel comfortable to take the plunge. And so I've had a, career of jobs that seemingly aren't, and really they aren't tied to each other. I worked in a special education preschool for a couple years. Love that job. I worked as like a skills trainer with kids with autism prior to that.
That's awesome. I don't remember that about your story, actually.
I might have not told you that. But
okay.
I mean, see, the thing is, to me, it's like none of those jobs were like anything that I intended to turn into a career. And go figure, they haven't been.
Okay.
They all had their value to me. And there's more. I mean, like there was a period in my life where I traveled, and I kind of traveled where I worked did some seasonal jobs in national parks. Was in New Zealand for a year, picked some apples there. Actually, when I was in New Zealand for this year, this is like in my younger 20s, and I worked for a photographer in New Zealand, and it didn't actually work out. I was his first hire. I was his primarily editor, but then also assistant. I was his first employee.
Sure.
And it didn't work out because I'm actually color deficient, or colorblind, as most people reference. So I can see in color, but reds, greens, blues, purples. So being an editor didn't work out for him. It somehow does work out for me being a photographer, which is something people always ask me, and I have a little blurb on my website about that. But when I was doing it for someone else, and that was my only job, and because normally when I do it for myself, editing and stuff, and have to deal with color, I can get third party, a friend, girlfriend, or someone I know to come and verify colors before I send off work to clients.
Sure.
But when I was that person working for this photographer, I'm going.
Well, there's a good takeaway there. I don't want to interrupt you, but what I'm hearing you say is that you had an experience that actually didn't work out. It was a job.
Mm-hmm.
You learned from that. It happens to be that right now, maybe not because of that. I'm not trying to imply that.
Mm-hmm.
It happens right now that you're a professional photographer and videographer working at a very high level. I mean, the quality of your work is absolutely top-notch professional.
Thank you.
And I think before we even turned on the microphones and cameras here, I saw you put systems into place so that you're not just playing to your strengths, but having ways to make any challenges that you've got still work out. I mean, you had all kinds of cool, color. I don't even know what they're called. Color palettes and things that you show to the different cameras that you can sync them together. Yeah. I mean, so you put systems in place.
Yeah. Well, son of an engineer, right?
Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah. That's how I pretty much operate in life. So
I love that. I mean, I think that's incredible. You don't know who's listening or watching these, right?
Maybe no one.
I mean, no, people are definitely, but and I'm picking a completely random example. I hope I don't completely fumble this or make it sound offensive in some way. But I mean, there could be a young person watching this right now who's struggling with dyslexia, and they might not think they could ever be an author,
mm-hmm.
right? I mean, I'm just thinking of a random example.
Sure.
There's ways to play to your strengths. There's ways to know what your challenges are and there's ways to put systems in place to help overcome them, or at least help manage them. So there's something about your story right there that could have sounded very, very self-limiting, and you're doing it on a professional level.
Right. Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah. So when I was working for this photographer, now instead of me being able to refer to friends or whoever was around, like, does this look strange? Are the skies pink or something? I'm now that guy for someone else, and I'm being paid to do it.
Sure.
Needless to say, it didn't work out for me working for him. So I didn't work for him for very long. But what it did give me was an in-person glimpse, instead of reading about it on blogs or something, or hearing it third person about self-employment. I got to see it firsthand for the short period of time I worked for him. And I got to see what it meant. He was very busy.
Yeah.
He was stressed. He was doing what he liked doing, which was great. But I got to see both. I got to see the whole picture. I got to see what it meant to be successful, and he was successful. He was one of probably the top photographer in New Zealand at the time. He covered the Rowing World Championships. Was the official photographer when that was hosted in 2010. And I worked for him during that, which is a weird thing to be when you're just you just got a job and then you're working for this this photographer who's covering this international event that all the countries are coming around. And so I got to see that, and that stuck in my mind. And granted, prior to that, I also had straight out of high school, me and some high school friends had a small video production business, but it was very passive. We were college students.
Okay.
We didn't need to make a full-time income. It was just kind of passive, like your website. You're talking about the website design. We were making a little bit of money, and we were getting a taste for it, but it wasn't quite the same. So this working for the photographer was, his name's Mike Hayden. Hey, Mike, if you're listening. When I was working for Mike, I got to see that, and I'm like, ooh, I don't know if I ever want to do that. I don't want, especially with something like photography, which was really a passion for me. And I didn't want to take it and turn that passion into something that I, was trying to monetize, and then it pulled me down the path and stuff.
That's really insightful. I feel like that's a possible dark side of being bossless, is you take something that you might love doing, turn it into work, and ruin it. So something to be aware of.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it can be, especially with something, and I think it's really, and I'm saying this from my personal experiences that I'm explaining right now. When you have something like photography, which you would already spend, and I have, in the past, thousands of dollars on cameras, lenses, equipment, and it's fun. You're like, well, I might as well just take photos. And then it's a strange way to get into business, because you're like, oh, but then what should I charge? I don't know, $100 and stuff. But if you actually played it with a business mindset, you'd actually realize you can't charge these tiny sums. Whereas if you were self-employed in a different area where you weren't as connected to it and you hadn't invested as much monetarily into it because you liked doing it, then maybe you'd come with a different approach. But this has been my path. So this, I got in with cameras, both in video and photography. And so rewinding to my own story, I've done a lot of different things, and none of them for very long. So I've hopped around on a lot of rocks. And after I hopped off that rock of working for Mike as his editor, I'm like, ooh, I'm going to remember this for a while. Kind of like how you had that informative experience with the teaching. Not that they're the same, but the way that, an experience informs us, right? And our decisions going forward with teaching for you. And with me, it wasn't necessarily, well, actually it kind of was with the photography, where I'm like, oh, I need to remember this, that's the danger. If I try and make this something that's a business, then it might change how it affects me. And I've always been someone who's very driven by, the way I summarize it is happiness. I feel like it kind of seems like lolly-da and doesn't really encompass it well, but I haven't figured out a better way to package it into a single word. But I'm focused on that. I'm not driven by money or anything. There's things that play into happiness, and money is one of them. You need a certain threshold.
Perhaps I feel like I've seen studies or heard statistics that talk about how once those basic needs are met, there's not a high return on income compared to happiness.
The correlation doesn't
There's not
carry
a correlation. Thank you. Yes.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and I always want to, whenever I'm talking to people about this, whether it's a casual conversation or what have you, I always make that clear was like you do need money to be happy, or most people do. I certainly do, but you might not need tons of it. Time's always been a huge valuable one to me. The job I had, the last job job I had, was a shoe cobbler, which I did for 5 years, which is the longest period of employment from a single employer I've had. That's the longest job I've ever held.
That was the biggest rock you stood on.
It's the largest rock, exactly. That was a boulder.
Because you had good shoes. That was when I met you.
Yeah, that is when, yeah. And I only just quit that job last year. And that was the biggest boulder I stood on job-wise. And it was the last one I stood on, at least as of this recording.
Yes.
And it was through all my experiences prior that I saw and developed like, oh, I don't know if I want to try and work for myself or not. I know what it means. So I've always systematically found jobs that I find a lot of fulfillment and enjoyment in, that typically lend themselves to a lot of flexibility in time-wise, which is what that job, being a shoe cobbler, did. Was like I had an amazingly flexible schedule, and I maximized that. I would do trips. I'd take 3-hour lunch breaks to go play soccer in the middle of the day, and go snowboarding midweek. And it was great. I didn't get paid very much, but I had like an extremely flexible schedule, and I enjoyed what I did. And it was low stress, and I worked with great people. It was amazing in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But it was like most of the jobs I have, for me, they were like finite, where I'm like, and like you said with teaching, a lot of similarities there, where I got to a point where I said like, oh, this is fine. It has served its purpose for me. It's not that it's a bad job. It's just like I'm ready for something else.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then I decided, it was last year, that I'm like, I'm going to try to just be self-employed and see how it goes and try and make it work. Because I don't want to have the regret in 20 years that I never actually made an attempt, and I just was scared by those like few experiences I had. So that's where I'm at today, and that's how I've got here. And,
I love it.
Yeah. And we'll see. I mean, I can't say that in another year or two that I won't like have decided to jump back on a rock, whether it's a small one or a big one, go back to school. I don't know. But for now, I'm enjoying what I'm doing, and I'm trying to make it work.
I applaud you because I do know what it's like to take that plunge and jump off of what should be a very stable rock from what we were raised to think in society, even though sometimes they're not, right? So it's a big deal. I mean, you leaving that 9-to-5 and starting Owen Roth Photography, that's big. That's major. And I like how part of the takeaway message in your story right there too is that I didn't hear failure as your perspective on any of those things, right? There's these chapters, there's these side hustles, there's these things you pursue, whether they're solopreneur ventures versus, working for someone else, but there's something to take away from all those things and something to learn there, and it becomes part of your operating system, as I like to think about it, part of your mindset for the next things that you do. So there's value in all those different chapters, all those different parts.
No, there's absolute value. That's a great way to summarize it. Is just like, I view that that's the lens I view everything through, whether it's career stuff like we're talking about, or relationships, or just general experiences. You're not going to have like this like polished, smooth like path you walk on that's like perfect, and that'd be boring. Like, and it's not realistic either. Yeah. You're going to have ups and downs, and I've had ups and downs. But I think as long as you're seeking what makes you happy, and trying to be true to yourself and figure out what that is, then that's what's important. And you should chase that. And it's it's something that only you can really answer for yourself. You can't refer to someone else and say, hey, what works? Because what works for you, Michael, might not work for me. Likewise, the next person. Everyone's formula is going to be unique to themselves. So you can get advice from other people, and I think that's something you should do, as you've advocated throughout this discussion. I think that's great, but you need to use those as resources, take in that information, process it, and then take action and do something, and then evaluate your action and see like what the results are and like how it's working for you, and then make a new action potentially. And
then take action is a big part of that. And not to sound cliche in that regard, because we all get those, or at least I get those like ads that pop up on my YouTube when I'm trying to watch something specific, and there's just like some guy stepping out of a luxury car yelling, "You got to take action!" Blah blah blah. I'm like, what is this?
Yeah.
But even though I disdain the way they portray that message, it's important. And I have a real estate training coaching company relationship. I have a business coach through an organization called Buffini & Company. Big fan of them. And we were just talking about how I went to a event that they held on personal growth and development recently called Masterminds Summit. And Brian Buffini, who's the founder of the organization, he had this great quote about how a lot of people think that we're here just doing motivation, just being like, I'm so great, say in the mirror, I'm so great, hug your neighbor. He's like, motivation without information and action, and I'm butchering the quote, but something to that effect. Motivation without information and action, all that gives you is a motivated idiot. And he might have been quoting someone else, maybe Zig Ziglar. But I was like, oh my gosh, that's really accurate. The point is not just to get motivated and learn things and hear about people's entrepreneurial adventures, but to be able to get to the point where you do feel comfortable making an informed decision, because there's always going to be some risks that you're taking when you have a major life change, like leaving a job to start your own business. I mean, there's risks there, but getting to the point where you have a good understanding of what those risks are going to be so that you're okay with those risks, and then you take action and make something happen and at least give it a shot. Right? Because even though some things can be very, very challenging in life, if you really want to look for the good side, you can usually find something, even in a business failure, you still learn a lot doing that.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
So in that regard, is it really a business failure or was it just experience?
Yeah, I view it like that. I mean, I view this, not to totally steal the show here, but
it is your show.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to say show, but yes, it is a show. But I meant, not to steal your point, but yeah, I've already experienced that in this year and a half of like trying to do this full time.
Really?
Because I didn't go in, great learning mistake. Didn't go in with like a really clear cut plan.
Okay.
I had found some success in my photography business, as a side hustle to my day job when I was working as a shoe cobbler.
Yeah.
And I had found that for like pretty much it actually correlated pretty well with the pandemic, even though it had nothing to do with it. It's purely coincidental. But I was actually making money for the first time consistently in my photography business while holding a job. And then that's when I'm like, well, I'm not going to do this forever. So, I'm going to take a plunge, take an attempt.
Mm-hmm.
Be fully self-employed, and that's what I did. But I didn't really have a great battle plan, and that really showed. The first 6 months, 9 months, I mean, it was essentially like it was a vacation. I was paying for it because I was just living off the savings I'd built up, but I wasn't really doing anything with my business. And what I found myself doing is I was like chasing rabbits. Like someone would mention to me, like this is a real world example. Someone said like, oh, gym photography. Like I think there's a real demand. There's not many people who do gym photography for like CrossFit gyms and stuff like that. I'm like, oh yeah, that sounds great. And then I wouldn't really think about it or do the research too much. I would just kind of like chase it as like, oh, that's what I need to do because it's photography. And and there was a couple other ones too. And you do need to like experiment and try things out for sure. But I think I was doing it a little bit too haphazardly. And there wasn't a huge plan. So there was mistakes made, but you know what? I learned from them, and now I'm starting to develop a little bit more of a plan, an approach of what I do.
So I really enjoy getting to learn about you in the process of this conversation, by the way. And I appreciate you being authentic too, because that's not always easy.
Yeah.
Part of what I'm gleaning from you, Owen, here is that you're very, very much a free-spirited explorer personality type. Is that okay to say?
That's okay. Yeah, it sounds woo-woo, but
I don't mean it that way, though.
I know you don't mean it. That's why I'm smiling. Yeah.
But
that's fair.
But what I'm catching you say, though, is that there was almost a part of that personality that you realized you needed to manage in the process of being a self-employed entrepreneur, because you needed to set up, and hopefully have done just that, since you're the one who said it, right? You need to set up maybe some organization, some structure in that regard, to not just be getting these ideas and having them be neat ideas that spark and fizzle away, but to actually put in a plan and set some goals and figure out how to actually run it like a business, which I think is what you're doing now from what I've seen.
I'm attempting. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. The thing is, I'm probably still making mistakes, but that is how we get growth, right? but yes, short answer, yes, I am in a different mind, but I wouldn't be here if I hadn't made those mistakes earlier.
Sure.
And then I'm, in however long from now, years from now, I'll probably look back at this moment and be like, oh, and I still didn't have it together, but you walk up the stairs, right? And each stair has a lot on it, and a lot of the things on it are mistakes and experiences, but you use those to get to the next step.
I love that. Absolutely. And it's making me reflect, not necessarily on my public education experience per se, but just on stereotypes about public education, to be fair.
Yeah.
Where the public school system that we exist with really does, I want to say, foster or promote the idea that there's a right answer for everything.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I think that's a fair thing to say, even though I'm not trying to fault teachers. That's not what I'm getting at here. Mm-hmm. But I think that kids in the classroom feel social pressure to get the answer right. Is that fair to say?
Mm-hmm.
And that might really imprint on them that that's how life works.
Right.
And I don't think that's how life really works. It's not about getting the right answer, right? It's about learning along the way.
Yeah.
So that's an important thing just to be aware of.
Sure. I feel like the employment channel is it's kind of similar to walking along a forest path that someone's already made for you.
Interesting.
Trails made. You go out to here locally, the McDunn Forest, and you walk on a trail, and it's great, and that works well. It's pretty safe. It's already made. You know where you're going. You know the path. Yeah. There's still risk. You can still twist an ankle, trip over a root, get attacked by some animal. Low odds though for people who don't hike. Anyways,
it's pretty safe out here.
It's pretty safe, but
your analogy is valid.
Something can happen, but it's pretty safe. Or you have the other path of the Bossless Path of doing self-employment or freelancing something, and you kind of have to forge your own path. You have to whip out that machete and just start carving. And you can look at a map prior, and you should ideally to figure out where your goals are, but you still have to get there.
Yeah.
And you still have to cut that path, and you have to figure out how to get from point A. Or you can go in like I did and have a lot of people do, is without really looking at the map too well, and then you just cutting away, and you're just oh man, where am I? I don't even know. Did I waste all that time and energy? But either way, you're trying to go somewhere. And sometimes it's the actual pre-made path that works better. But some people want that adventure.
Sure.
And they want to blaze their own path, because the paths that are already created, the jobs that are on the table for them, I don't know, they just don't fit them. They're boring. It's too travel. There's too many people doing the same thing. They want to make something custom for themselves.
I'm saying this to not change the subject, but hopefully dovetail off of what you just said.
Mm-hmm.
As I reflect on my experience as a real estate agent, as a realtor, I'm quoting my realtor, I'm quoting Anne from way back when. And she said to me, she's Michael, I am totally unemployable at this point in my life. And what she was referring to was, she was I've been doing this long enough that I could never go back to work and work for someone else.
Mm-hmm.
And I get that now, 10 years into the business. There's no way for me right now that I could go back to a conventional job and have to be working for someone else. I've really enjoyed that about being self-employed, even though it's been a ton of work.
Mm-hmm.
I love that I'm the one driving that, and that it's an opportunity for me to plant seeds in a garden and water them and nurture them and have them grow. And it's all on me, which means, hey, it's a lot of work and there's a lot of responsibility.
Yeah.
But I can directly control, impact, influence the results. And whatever I'm willing to put into it, I can get back out of it. And that's something that's amazing about the Bossless Path.
Yeah.
So as long as you don't fall into the dark side of that and work yourself to death, that's don't burn yourself out, which is a part of my takeaway message that I'm working on actively.
Sure.
So
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you're human, and that's one thing. It's just like we were talking about, we've touched on many times now. It's just like you need to be a little bit honest with yourself to like realize what works for you, what doesn't work for you. And yeah.
So a really good takeaway there, I love your forest analogy, is the importance of setting up systems, setting up goals, and being aware, just being aware of, what you're doing, so that you're spending your time intentionally.
Right.
Because you can learn from that entire hike, but the more you can be deliberate and pre-plan and give yourself some structure, I think that's just really powerful to be able to springboard from.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We've talked a lot about advice so far, little sprinkles here and there, some larger than others. But do you have any other advice you might lend to someone who's thinking about a Bossless Path?
I think the most important thing that I'd want to reemphasize there is just bringing it back to the importance of a business plan. I think that for a lot of normal 9-to-5 employees, just like I was, you probably never heard of the words business plan before. And a business plan is a fancy way of saying, let's have goals in mind. Let's have a system and a plan in place for how we're going to get there. And a big part of that is also the financial side of things. Working with a mentor, for example, or someone who's been there, done that before you have, to set up a budget, or if you don't like the word budget, spending plan for how you're going to structure that venture. I think that's just a great way to have a setup for success. And I'm a big fan of setting lofty goals and seeing where you land. So I'd encourage people to set lofty goals in that regard. But I think it is really important to have a plan because it'll make your life easier. So I would say learn about just a basic business plan. Even if you never end up submitting it to a bank to ask for a business loan, you'll still have that framework and structure in place, which I think is really helpful and important.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I wish I had that advice, or actually I heard a version of that advice, but I wish I had followed it more early in my career, but
I wish I'd followed it better.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. Great, Michael. Well, how can people get in touch with you, whether it's real estate stuff or all the endeavors you have going, your books potentially coming out and all that?
Right. So we're talking about books that don't exist yet, but I love that we're thinking positive it's going to happen. I would say the best way to get in touch by the time this episode airs is probably to go to the landing page that also doesn't exist just yet, but we're just going to make a website that's myname.com, michaelkrasilovsky.com, because my current real estate team is called Team K Realty, but the problem with that is that it's all about me in that name, and I don't want it to be that way anymore, so we're going to have to rebrand that, which will probably happen by the time this airs. So I don't know what website to point you towards there, but we'll have a landing page at myname.com.
Okay. Well, we'll get people pointed in the right direction.
Sounds good.
All right, Michael. Well, this has been a fantastic conversation. I really appreciate it.
Right back at you. Again, thank you for taking the time and for asking me to be a part of your journey so that we can hopefully just really scale what we've learned along the way and help impact your viewer listeners. I'm very big on thanking the host. You could be doing anything with your time, and you've chosen to take time out of your busy day to talk with someone like me in an effort to get information out that will help other people. And that's awesome. I really appreciate you doing that.
Well, thank you. And I feel exactly the same way about you and all of my guests. Is just like, I'm gracious every time someone like you is going to give me hours of their time and knowledge. It's fantastic. So yeah.
Let's all do better together.
There you go. All right, Michael, thank you very much.
Thank you. Really appreciate you.
Yeah. And there you have it. Another episode. Great conversation with Michael. If you want to hear more conversations like this one, please subscribe to the podcast or follow me. And until then, this has been The Bossless Path. Catch you next time.